In the year 2371, humanity finally solved the oldest puzzle. They became the architects of gravity. Cities of spun light and diamond filament were unmoored from the tired Earth, ascending into the heavens to drift on controlled currents of spacetime itself. They had built a utopia on a bedrock of rewritten physics, but in sculpting the very fabric of reality, they had sent a tremor through the void, a ripple at a pond they never knew existed, and something, from the shore of that pond, had finally looked back. Humanity learned that the laws of physics were not immutable rules. They were merely the thin, fragile ice over an immeasurable, conscious, and utterly alien deep. The age of miracles had begun. The age of mankind's godhood. Ethelgard, the first of the skyborne continents, housed over 30 million souls, its anchor a pinpoint gravitational singularity held in perfect stasis, a captured star in miniature. From its alabaster spires, one could watch the auroras dance at eye level. On the ground, the old world healed. Forests retook the concrete skeletons of ancient metropolises. The air cleansed by technology that now seemed quaint, almost primitive. Humanity had solved energy, solved scarcity, solved distance. The fold drive was their masterwork. It did not propel a ship through space, it pulled space itself towards the ship. A journey to Proxima Centauri, once a generational dream, now took less than 2 weeks. Humanity spilled out into the galaxy, seeding new worlds under new suns. They were magnificent. They were masters of their own creation, reshaping planets with graviton lenses, building ringworlds around distant stars, living lives of purpose and endless exploration. They believed they were alone, the sole intelligence in a silent, mechanical cosmos. This belief was their greatest and final mistake. The first sign was not a bang, but a whisper. A single data point from the Chandra X-ray Observatory, now a relic, orbiting a silent Earth. Dr. Eris Thorne, a historian of pre-fold physics, noted the anomaly first. A pulsar, designated PSRJ 0108-1431, a celestial clockwork of perfect regularity for millennia, missed a beat. For 1.73 microseconds, it simply paused. It was a physical impossibility, a violation of everything they knew. The data was dismissed as a sensor ghost, an echo in an aging machine. But then came another. On a colony world in the TRAPPIST system, a child's ball, dropped from her hands, hovered for 3 full seconds, a foot above the ground, before continuing its fall, as if nothing had happened. Then the shadows began to bend. Not all of them, and not all the time. Just a flicker. At the edge of your vision, a shadow that fell at an angle that defied the light source. An optical illusion, people told themselves. A trick of the mind. But the true implication was far stranger than mere glitches. These were not random events. Thorne, using a quantum array, discovered a pattern, a terrifyingly complex and non-random structure to the anomalies. He realized they were probes, not of technology, but of pure geometry, sent by minds for whom our 3 dimensions were a mere plane. They weren't trying to communicate. They were trying to look. And when they looked, our reality buckled under the strain. The geometric intrusions began. A flash of an impossible color in the sky. The corner of a room that seemed, for an instant, to contain 4 right angles instead of 3. These were the first points of contact. Not an alien ship, not a radio signal, but the universe itself being momentarily rewritten by a curious observer. The physics of our world was a fragile surface tension, and something was pressing its finger against it from the outside. The hum started in 2385. It had no source. It could not be measured by any instrument, yet it was everywhere. A low, subliminal vibration felt in the bones, in the teeth. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock that had never existed before. Panic was a slow-growing vine. At first, governments and media conglomerates assured the public it was a new form of mass hysteria, a psychological byproduct of a post-physical society. But you cannot explain away a shared nightmare. The first mind broke a month later. A gravitic engineer named Lena Petrova. She was calibrating a fold drive on the Starship Odyssey. She started screaming about the angles being wrong. She clawed at her own eyes, trying to unsee the impossible geometry of the engine's containment field. She was the first victim of dimensional dissonance syndrome, a new madness for a new age. Its victims were those whose minds were too perceptive. Those who could see the stitches holding reality together begin to fray. They saw the beings outside, not their form, but their presence. They described it as a shape that occupied the same space as everything else. A creature whose body was a law of mathematics. They said its thoughts were not sounds or images, but axioms of logic that overwrote your own. To perceive it was to be erased. Cults formed, worshipping the architects outside. They held ceremonies in rooms built with purposefully non-Euclidean angles, hoping to be noticed, to be chosen. They saw the breaking of the world as a rapture, a transcendence into a higher state of being. The hum grew louder. The intrusions became more frequent, more stable. For one entire minute, the sky over the capital city of Neo-Alexandria turned into a perfect, crystalline lattice, each point of light a window into another, utterly alien universe. The world watched, mesmerized and horrified. Humanity, the architects of gravity, the self-proclaimed masters of creation, were reduced to mice living in the walls of a house, suddenly aware of the owners moving about their day. Their every action, their greatest technologies, had been nothing more than loudly scratching at the floorboards, drawing an unwelcome and incomprehensible attention. Dr. Thorne, secluded in his earthbound observatory, never stopped working. He wasn't trying to fight them. He knew that was like a two-dimensional drawing trying to fight the artist holding the pencil. He was trying to understand. He fed all the anomaly data, the timing of the hum, the vector of the geometric intrusions, into a quantum consciousness simulator. He believed the hum was not a sound. It was friction, the friction of something vast and multidimensional passing through the membrane of their reality. He just wanted to know what it was, what shape it had. On his screen, the simulation resolved. It was not a weapon. It was not a ship. The simulation rendered a single, terrifying image. The simulation showed an eye of impossible scale. Its iris, a galaxy of swirling light. Its pupil, a perfect and absolute blackness. And as Thorne stared, frozen, the pupil on his screen began to dilate, as if it had just focused on him, on all of them. Across the settled galaxy, the intrusions stopped. The shadows snapped back to their rightful places. The glitches ceased. For 12 blissful hours, the universe seemed to hold its breath. A silent, perfect peace fell. Engineers reported that fold drives were suddenly more efficient. Gravitic plates required 5% less energy. It wasn't a reprieve. It was an adjustment. The owners of the house had heard the scratching. They were not angry. They were simply making room, bending the bars of the cage to get a better look at what was inside. Then, over Ethelgard, the sky began to peel open. It wasn't a violent tear. It was a calm, deliberate unveiling, as if a celestial artist were peeling a fresco from a wall to reveal the raw brickwork of reality beneath. What lay beyond was not the cold vacuum of space. It was a landscape of pure thought, a blinding architecture of concepts and possibilities made manifest. There were no stars, no planets, just an infinite, rolling vista of light and geometry, pulsing with a life so profound it made the entire human race feel like a single, temporary cell on a forgotten petri dish. And then, it reached down. From the incandescent tear, a single filament of reality descended. It wasn't matter. It wasn't energy. It was a line of pure intention. It drifted down towards the central spire of the Ethelgard governance nexus, a tower that represented the pinnacle of human engineering. The filament touched the tip of the spire. There was no explosion, no sound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the tower changed. It was still a tower, but it was no longer a human tower. Its geometry now obeyed a higher, more complex set of physical laws. It was optimized, corrected. The people inside were not killed. Their reports, hours later, were a babble of newfound inspiration and terrifying clarity. They spoke of understanding the true nature of their work, of seeing the unnecessary variables in their own thoughts. They had been edited. Was this an attack? Or was it an act of maintenance? Was it a gardener pulling a weed? Or was it a god answering a prayer that had never been uttered? Because Thorne had seen that pattern before, the spiraling, optimized geometry of that tower. He pulled up the foundational documents of gravitic theory, the unified principles discovered 3 centuries ago that had lifted humanity from the mud of their homeworld. It was there, the same mathematical signature, hidden deep within the code, like a watermark. It was the architect's signature, and suddenly, the truth crashed down on him with a weight far greater than gravity. Humanity had never invented gravitic technology. They hadn't discovered it. They hadn't stumbled upon it. It had been given to them. The knowledge had been seeded into their collective consciousness, a whisper of an idea, an implanted axiom that their brightest minds mistook for their own genius. The entire technological leap that defined their civilization, their ascension to the stars, had been a Trojan horse. They hadn't drawn attention by scratching at the floorboards. The floorboards had been designed to be scratched. For what purpose? Why gift a race of primitives the keys to the kingdom? Were they a child's ant farm, given a new, interesting toy to see what they would do with it? Or was it something more sinister? Was their entire society, their art, their science, their expansion, just the carefully managed growth of a crop being primed for a harvest we could not possibly comprehend? And who were the first to hear the whisper? Thorne frantically cross-referenced the birth of gravitic science with psychiatric records from the era, and he found them. A dozen physicists, mathematicians, and engineers, all pioneers in the field, all of whom died in institutions, driven mad by auditory and geometric hallucinations. They weren't mad. They were the first receivers, the first to get the signal raw, unfiltered, before it was softened into inspiration. They were the first to feel the friction of a higher thought pressing into their own. But as Thorne stared at the gibberish scrawled by these mad prophets, a second pattern began to emerge from the noise. It wasn't a blueprint, it was a warning. A different hand, a different voice, screaming across the void, trying to tell us that the gift was a trap. The warning wasn't a language, it was a scar, a deliberate, defiant flaw carved into the flawless logic of the architect's gift. It was the mathematical equivalent of a scream. While the architect's code was a perfect crystal, this was a shard of broken glass, a rebellion of prime numbers, a dissonance designed to break the harmony. And beyond his window, the harmony was spreading. The correction was flowing out from the central spire, not as a wave of destruction, but as a placid, silent tide of perfection. Streets rearranged themselves into patterns of optimal efficiency. Homes reshaped their walls to achieve acoustic perfection. It was beautiful, and it was erasure. Thorne looked from the creeping perfection outside to the frantic scrawls of the long-dead scientists. Their madness wasn't the side effect of the signal. It was the purpose. The human mind, with all its flaws, its irrationality, its chaos, was incapable of perfectly processing the architect's signal. Our brains were the flaw in their system. We didn't just receive the signal, we broke it. And in breaking it, we created the only weapon that could fight it. The iridescent wave of change was now washing up the base of his own observatory. He didn't have years to build a defense. He had seconds. He slammed his hand onto his console, not shutting down the systems, but opening them. He rerouted every watt of power, every processing cycle, not to the architect's perfect axiom, but to the desperate, jagged waveform of human madness. He wasn't broadcasting a shield. He was broadcasting a disease. Our disease. The cacophony of the human soul, weaponized and amplified a trillionfold, shot upwards. It struck the architect's descending filament of pure intention. There was no explosion. There was only a soundless, piercing shatter. The perfect line of light fractured into a billion screaming pieces. The sky itself seemed to recoil. Across Ethelgard, the tide of perfection stopped. The corrected buildings stuttered, their alien geometry flickering and fighting against the reimposed chaos of their original human design. The tower, the first to be changed, shuddered. Its elegant spirals momentarily snapped back into hard, imperfect right angles. Humanity's flaw was reasserting itself. The gift was being rejected. The tear in the sky did not heal. It remains, a permanent, glitching scar. A window into a reality we now knew was watching. We were not saved. We were merely noticed. The gardener knows the weeds can fight back now. Our technology, our very civilization, built upon their poisoned gift, is now unstable. But it is ours. For the first time, it is truly ours. The harvest was denied, but the war for reality has just begun. To witness the next stage of the struggle, subscribe to SynthetixScape.